personally, I think the stock market is the best leading indicator. Real-time anecdotes from people that own and run jewelry businesses. I mean, that's where you want to where you want to look. I mean, when you look at these, quote unquote, classic economic indicators, they're lagging. And I think that's the problem. And you look at, the Federal Reserve, this time last year said they were expecting that inflation was going to be transitory, even though the stock market was, very clearly implying the opposite. And I think that's kind of what got the Fed into the problem last year. They were looking at lagging data. And I think because of that, they lost a lot of credibility. Now there's, pure vitriol towards the Federal Reserve, and they really still haven't admitted to being wrong. And I think that's kind of got us into the situation we're in right now. And this is leading to a much more volatile economic backdrop than we needed to be in. But I think you have to be careful with these indicators that, may be sold as leading indicators when they're really just, looking in the rear view mirror. And with most of this economic data, it takes a long time to aggregate and to finally disseminate it. And by the time, it hits us, it's old news. So we always want to be looking, forward as much as we can. And again, I think the best way to do that is, talk to people that own and run businesses, because they're the ones that are on the front line.
Agree with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, accurate, up-to-date data is really important when you're making your decisions. Speaking of the economy, just in general, and I think, Paul, you touched on this a little bit already, but there's been a lot of talk recently about whether or not we're heading into a recession. Do any of you see a recession in the cards this year?
Yes, I'll just maybe follow up on that. So, I mean, it's certainly possible. I think the chances are elevated relative to an average year. But I think for us to have a bad recession this year, I think there's going to need to be an additional catalyst, whether it's, geopolitical escalation of tensions, more than, expected persistency of inflation, energy crisis, monetary policy mistakes, something like that. And I think, the reality is, I think so much of this is just going to depend on the macro backdrop, which is going to depend on what the Federal Reserve is doing. And, people's eyes glaze over when you talk about, monetary policy, but the reality is that kind of is what determines how much liquidity is in the economy. And there's a extremely high correlation with what they do and what the economy does. And as perverse as it sounds, it's the Fed has a dual mandate. They have to kind of keep employment and inflation in check. And right now, employment is in check and inflation isn't. And I think they're going to continue to be tight and try to put the brakes on the economy. And they essentially have to, they have to break the jobs market a little bit, because wage inflation is sticky, and that's what ultimately leads to more persistent inflation. And that's what they don't want. So it sounds terrible and sounds perverse, but that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to break the jobs market a little bit.